choosing spiritual practices based on our structure. This is really essential to understand, and unfortunately it's not discussed much in modern metaphysics, such as the concept of initiation itself, or the idea of spiritual transmissions that can be sent into a person's energy field, or what it means to work with thought forms, or what mind power is. We have access to knowledge that has been updated for the most recent developments in human consciousness and recent changes in the human energy field. So, job one for us is to get an overview, to get a context of what is the way that the human being is put together. What's our structural format on which all of our initiation practices will be built? Because initiation practices are built in knowing, for example, what subtle body of the human being we're interacting with, or what energy center needs to be activated for us to perform certain functions of higher consciousness, or certain practical spiritual activities in the world. Take advantage of this opportunity. So the first thing we need to be aware of is that every person has a unique configuration in their own energy and their consciousness. That configuration of the energy and consciousness leads to the activation of specific energy centers in their body more than others, and specific energetic connections and flows of energy movements from one center to another. This can even take the form of particular types of geometries in the body of energy, which have specific purposes and effects on the person's consciousness and energy. When we talk about structure, what we're talking about is this type of unique configuration of the energetic field and the person's consciousness that's related to their specific capacities and their current level of maturity at all the different plane and subtle body levels that we talked about before. The physical, the etheric, the emotional, the mental, and the higher spiritual levels. Your structure is the key to what capacities you currently have and your level of maturity on all these different levels. And in the same person, the level of maturity can be very, very different in different subtle bodies. So you can have a tremendous level of maturity in your mental body, but have an extremely immature emotional body. That's extremely common today. And it's particularly common in spiritual circles. We need to understand that this is what structure really is. It's the underlying foundation of all of our consciousness and energy. And it's a literal structure that's in your energy field. One of the first things that any esoteric teacher will do when he meets a person on the path, or a person that's going to be a student of some kind, is they will look into their energetic structure. Because the person's energetic structure, again, reveals their level of maturity, their present capacities, and all spiritual teachers know that a certain stability and crystallization of parts of the structure of a person is essential in order for them to be able to understand and work responsibly with higher work regarding spiritual realities. If you do not have a strong and solid structure, then certain aspects of higher initiation simply will not be possible until you develop those parts of your structure. Now, understanding our energetic structure is absolutely critical for initiation work. We've described the way that every thought that you have, every feeling, every impulse to action that you have creates particular energetic movements and activations in our subtle bodies. And this is connected to one of our core principles in spiritual science that we've mentioned multiple times before, that consciousness and energy are two sides of the same coin. They constantly affect each other. It's a two-way street, in other words, so that if you do work with your consciousness, that work will then reflect in energy movements and activations in your subtle body. And of course, the other part of this is that if you do practices based on energetic movements, so Qi Kong and things of that kind, that those energetic movements will change your consciousness. Again, consciousness and energy both affect each other all the time, and we can choose practices that are consciousness-based or those that are energy-based, but both parts are going to get affected, whichever we choose to focus on. We need to be aware that the spiritual practices taught in different spiritual traditions have been intentionally crafted by the teachers in those traditions in order to create specific structures in the subtle bodies of the initiates within that tradition. That makes possible certain types of higher spiritual development and initiation within that tradition. The person's subtle body is being formed through these practices in such a way that they can then perform the functions that are focused on by whatever that particular tradition is. And different traditions focus on different types of functions and abilities. One particular tradition will focus on your developing very strong healing abilities with the etheric life body. Another will do almost nothing with that, but will focus on being able to discern higher spiritual realities at the astral plane and in higher spiritual planes. Different traditions focus on different things, and they structure the subtle bodies of their initiates in different ways based on what the purposes of that tradition happen to be. Through our work in modern spiritual science, we can analyze the different traditions and get clarity about what tradition focuses on what strengths to develop through the practices that they give in their initiation tradition, that again create specific structures in the subtle bodies of their initiates that make their consciousness and energy body focused on particular things. Again, this is something that's not talked about very much in modern metaphysics, but it needs to become a common topic because it's absolutely essential. We hear a lot that all spiritual traditions are going to the same place. And that's true from one perspective in that they're all going towards spirit because there's no place else to go. But it's not true that they get there through the same path, or that people have the same experiences or even the same final result from working in different traditions. And we need to make informed decisions today on the independent path of spiritual initiation to be able to know exactly what we are choosing as our own path of creating structures in the subtle body and thereby creating our spiritual destiny. We need to be aware that many people, in fact most people, on the modern independent path of spiritual initiation already have specific structures in their energetic body that they've brought with them into this incarnation based on the practices they've done in previous lifetimes. To be attracted to something like an independent path of spiritual initiation already shows a certain level of maturity in an individual. If they didn't have that level of maturity, they'd be attracted to following in a very dogmatic and narrow way, normally one type of external religion or another that they believe in completely. To actually become an autonomous spiritual being and be able to make your own free will choices and understand things consciously and be able to access the gifts and understandings and techniques from multiple spiritual traditions takes a certain level of maturity, even to be attracted to that. And so you will find that you have certain structures already in your subtle bodies that have led you to this level of maturity and that will make certain things possible for you when you begin to examine these structures in the subtle body. Now, one thing that you may have noticed in your own spiritual development as you grew up is that the way that you perceive the world around you or you thought about certain things was not always the same as other people around you. Spiritual topics may have been of more interest to you than to other people in your environment or even in your own family. And so one thing that you might notice is that people in this type of metaphysical work tend to have a type of innate understanding of certain high spiritual concepts, such as the concept of initiation itself, or the idea of spiritual transmissions that can be sent into a person's energy field, or what it means to work with thought forms, or what mind power is. These kinds of things we have a sense of because we've worked with it before. We have a certain maturity about it. For another person who has very little interest in this and doesn't have the subtle body structures created yet, they don't really get it. They need to have a lot of explanation and they still don't really get it. So this is something that we can see in ourselves, that is part of our structure, the things that we understand innately that other people don't pick up on, and also the particular types of spiritual skills that we carry. That's part of our core energy blueprint that other people may not have. So what we want to take a look at now is then to go deeper into this aspect of understanding our structure about perceiving aspects of our own structure. How do we directly look at our structure and get an understanding of it? And this can also be done with other people. And this can be extremely helpful for us. The first thing we need to mention is the way that we have focused in this course on teaching you a particular practice that we've called the Energy Field Awareness Practice. The Energy Field Awareness Practice, or EFAP, as we have shortened it, is the practice where we develop the habit at the end of any spiritual practice or activity that we do, that we check into the structure of our own energetic field, and we just observe how has the practice affected my consciousness and my energy, which could also be described as how has the practice structured my consciousness and my energy. So with our checking into the structure of our energetic field as a result of the practices that we do, this is an essential first step of our being able to recognize our own structure and the way that things affect us so that we can make informed decisions about what practices we want to do, and we know how the practices affect us. Because as we've said before, on the independent path of spiritual initiation, we need to be fully conscious of the particular structure and purpose and effects of all the spiritual practices that we do. Now, the next few stages that come after this checking into the energetic field are as follows. At the next stage, two of the simplest layers that we can examine in our subtle bodies to get a sense of effects on them are the etheric body level and the astral level. The etheric body level or layer is experienced when you feel vibration or tingling or density or pressure in the subtle bodies. When we say density, it means that a part of your energy body, like let's say around the third eye, feels more dense than the energy around it. When we say pressure, it's like something is pressing in on a particular energetic location in your body. And you can also perceive these etheric sensations in terms of heat and cold sensations. Not necessarily a physical sensation of heat and cold, but an energetic sensation of heat and cold. Then the astral layer is experienced quite differently, where we either feel or see in our own mental screen light and darkness, and also color. Those are particular modalities of the astral plane, which is again quite different from the type of feeling that we have of the etheric body. And so when we do energy field awareness, we can look into what we're feeling and what we're perceiving with the light and color in parts of our own energetic body. And again, this is also illuminating for us the experiences we have that are related to the etheric life body versus those that are within the astral body. So now we're becoming actually conscious of the subtle bodies and able to look into the structures created inside of them. The next level is that we can then perceive which exact energy centers of our body are activated or are sedated by a particular spiritual practice. So those energy centers in us that are activated will have increased sensations within our energy body of their energy movement and activity. And we can also have sometimes an internal vision of the types of qualities that we just described for the etheric and astral layers of ourselves when these energy centers are activated. Now at higher levels, this can become a direct perception of how these activated energy centers then connect to particular spiritual beings, spiritual worlds, spiritual forces of various kinds. So that's how this progresses over time. The next stage is that after this initial work of just becoming aware if it presents itself to us when we empirically check in during the energy field awareness practice, we can then start checking into specific centers of our energy body. In other words, not just seeing which ones manifest themselves to our inner awareness when we check in, but we can methodically go through looking at and examining different centers of the energy body one at a time. And so the way to start with this practice is looking at what we call the anchor points. You can check into the energy center that's the anchor point for the I Am presence that's in the very center of the head in the cave of Brahma. You can check into the anchor points for the astral body in the head and the heart and the hara, or the belly region of the body. You can look into the 7 anchor points of the etheric, which are what we think of normally as the 7 chakras of the body. You can look at the 12 anchor points of the physical body, which is related to the 12 levels of the physical body and also the 12 meridians of Chinese medicine. These are particular anchor points then that we can check into to begin to see how we're getting structured. Then we can also take a look at this in terms of the structuring effects on people's different subtle bodies themselves. So in other words, as we said before, a person may have a very highly developed mental body, but a very underdeveloped emotional body. Their emotional body may be very wounded or immature, which is why they fled into the higher mental body to be able to think and cope with things in the world without having to deal with those painful emotions. In fact, it's very common that even many Eastern gurus that are presented as very, very highly developed have very highly developed mental or higher spiritual bodies, but still have major issues that are held within the emotional body. We can then, at a next higher level, begin to do more advanced work that actually is most effective after we have done a training in sacred geometry, when sacred geometry is taught as an actual initiation science. When you learn sacred geometry as initiation science, you can start then looking at deeper levels of structure that a person has, and also energetic structures in the world, that are based on particular geometric forms, that have particular vibratory qualities and have particular effects on consciousness. And so one aspect of this is looking for the geometric forms that are created in the subtle bodies through the structuring process. This can be something as simple as particular triangles of energy that are formed in the energy body, where, for example, 3 activated centers will be linked up together. Or it can be something more advanced, like looking at something like the Tree of Life pattern, known in the Jewish Kabbalah, and that has offshoots in other traditions, like what in the Daskalos tradition in Cyprus is called the Symbol of Life, which is based on the same basic pattern. And this is a more complex pattern of 10 energy centers in the body and their energy pathways of connection. So as we're looking at this next deeper aspect of studying structure, we can look for these types of geometric structures. But that's easiest once you've actually learned what these geometric structures are and what they signify. And that's best done through a higher level type of sacred geometry education that is based on initiation. When it's based on initiation work, sacred geometry becomes what the Rosicrucians refer to as learning to read the secret script, because these are the actual archetypes or patterns that everything in our world is based on, and they connect us in higher level initiation work to directly perceiving the thought forms from the mind of God that lay down all of these patterns. And the final thing to mention here about our learning to perceive our own parts of our energetic structure, as we're giving these bridging concepts to more advanced work, is looking for aspects of our structure from the perspective of different systems of energy qualities in the subtle bodies, taught in different traditions. So for example, you can look at it from the perspective of Chinese medicine, where you look at yin and yang energies in the body as simple polarities, and also the system of the 5 elements, or the 5 phases, in which all of these different elements in the body work with one another in particular cycles. And so, for example, you'll find if a person has focused too much on Kundalini practices and raising fire energy in the body, they may have ended up creating great difficulties in their own health and energetic balance by having burned out the water element from the body. And so seeing it from these different perspectives will illuminate different things that's going on in a person's energetic structure. Or you can examine it from the perspective of the 3 doshas of Indian Ayurveda, or from the perspective of the 4 different ethers in Rudolf Steiner's etheric physics that comes from the Rosicrucians. All of these becomes frames of reference or perspectives that we can use to be able to really understand subtle levels of a person's structure. Now this then brings us to the topic of us making informed choices about what practices we're going to do based on our energetic structure. As we look at aspects of our different subtle bodies, and if a person has problems with their emotional body, for example, that our 3rd essential exercise, which is connected to illuminating our feelings and also the control of the feelings so that we don't have to externally express every feeling that we have, but instead we relax into the feeling and let it become integrated into us instead of being expressed externally in an uncontrolled and sometimes destructive way. So for a person that has this type of issue in the emotional body, that it's not well controlled, the 3rd essential exercise helps them illuminate it from the inside and to get it under control in a way that it serves them rather than something that constantly undermines their life. Another example of this, as far as our choosing spiritual practices, is that it may be that a person that is very spiritually ungrounded, that has difficulties in their everyday life, that they have not fully incarnated into the physical body, and they don't even feel themselves in the body very strongly, may be attracted to learning advanced practices like out-of-body travel. And what you'll actually find is that this is something they have a natural subconscious tendency toward because they're already partly out of their body. They already don't want to be fully incarnated. And so they're naturally attracted to learning about being fully out of the body and out-of-body travel. And there's nothing wrong with learning these skills. These are natural skills at higher states of development. But we have to look at what's going to create the most balance and harmony according to their current structure. If they're not well incarnated presently, then they'd be much better served by doing work of a Qigong type, where they work on the etheric body and they focus on the feeling of etheric vibration and being actually present within the etheric vibration in their physical body, particularly in the lower energy centers of the body, the ones that are in the abdomen region, and then with the energy channels that go down into the legs, all the way down to the feet, and to the kidney 1 point in Chinese medicine, that's at the sole of the foot that connects us to the earth energy. So a person who is not well grounded, who is not well incarnated, who spends time opening up the lower energy centers of the abdomen, the leg channels, and then the channels in the feet that connect to the earth will get much greater benefits for their spiritual development than focusing on out-of-body travel at that current stage of their process. That's what we're talking about, choosing practices based on your energetic structure and being aware of this. Another example of this is that normally today when you go to a yoga class, the yoga class has a particular set of standard asanas or postures that they will lead you through in a sequence. It'll be different from one class to another based on who a person's teacher was and what sequence was that they trained in. But in higher levels of Indian Hatha Yoga, the teacher is trained to be able to actually perceive aspects of the energetic structure of the students that they have. And they will then assign them particular asanas or postures, sometimes pranayama breathing practices, that are based on balancing whatever things are out of balance currently in their body of energy. Now they do this based on concepts usually from Indian Ayurveda of the 3 doshas. And so, for example, if they have a student that has too much pitta in the body, too much fire energy, they don't need to give them postures or breathing exercises that's going to increase the fire in the body. They need to give them ones that will sedate the fire and help to increase other qualities. And by the same token, if a person has too much vata, too much air element in the body, they don't need to do practices that increase the air element. They need to sedate it and to increase these other elements. And so these are some practical examples of what I'm talking about regarding choosing spiritual practices based on our structure. This is really essential to understand, and unfortunately it's not discussed much in modern metaphysics. But for your independent path of spiritual initiation and for our new spiritual science, this is a really fundamental issue for us.